And yeah, so I know it's been a big week for me when I have to like squint and think and come up with wherever it is in my brain that remembers things from the past. It felt like a really big and traction shifting week for me this week. We're talking tonight. We're going to spend some time with water and who she is and how she is in the world. Just before the call started, I was just jotting down some like words that were just in this area. I wanted to be able to arrive fully and allow whatever's here to emerge, and the flow of water and this ease and this undulation was just emerging and descending in my room as I was waiting for the call to start. And if I think about how my week has felt, it's just been this up and this down and this really like deep, I'm going to say gentle, transformative, but really like supportive and just really deeply connected as my life has unfolded this week. And so coming into the conversation around water and really feeling what that is, that expression that I see outside of my eyes on the planet, and then that expression of water that I feel inside of my tissues, whether that be through tears, or at different hormonal cycle points in my life, in my 30-day cycle. It's a very visceral experience for me. So thank you for coming back to join me again. Only a week later, but many, many years later, it feels like. And yeah, so I just want to talk a little bit about water, and then I'll open up the floor. One of the things that inspired this series and this expression of love letters to Gaia was, what are the words that express, what are the poems that I can say with my language that honor the different elements of Gaia and who she is and who she's been, and in my own integrated becoming, you know, Gaia, in the ways that I express that uniquely. What are the tangible qualities and elements that I can tap into and put words to that allow insights to come and transformative moments to show up? And so I didn't really do that last week. We just sort of just dove in, and for whatever reason, this feels really important today to play with. So water for me, I grew up in northern BC, and so I grew up around copious amounts of lakes and rivers and streams, and we were a very outdoor family. I did a ton of camping and a ton of gardening and a ton of hunting and fishing and things that I was sort of drug along to. But during that experience, I really had an impactful experience being in nature. And when I think about water, I think about those summer nights camping with my grandparents, and then swimming and swimming and swimming and swimming, and out of the lake and then into the lake and at the river, and fishing for salmon, and then you know, back and forth from these bodies of water, and how I felt as a young girl getting out of the water, a little bit colder than what the air temperature was, but the freedom that I felt in my cells. And then as I grew up and I started to live life and did the doings and the college and all the things that happened in my 20s, I sort of stepped away from playing in that element of water in that way, and certainly not in a carefree way. And pools didn't really offer that for me, indoor man-made pools. And then when I started going to Hawaii a number of years ago, as well as Nova Scotia, I started to rekindle this relationship with water. And and what it felt like to be in open water and seawater versus fresh water, and very much so in the comfort of being enveloped inside of those bodies of water as I'm floating and feeling that deeper undulation within her movement. I discover over and over and over that same opening, that same freedom, that same sense of play and movement that I had when I was a young girl, that refreshing quality. As women, I think that we are deeply connected to water. I know that there's many Indigenous cultures who understand this perspective and have lived it for time immemorial, likely. But I know that in my own cycle with the moon and in my own cells, the amount of water that it, contained inside of these tissues, there is its own natural ebb and flow in those cycles. And the more I tap into that, the more I come to know myself in a much more forceful way, but in a gentle way also, and an ever-changing way. Water has this incredible ability to create erosion and move massive amounts of earth just by the undulation and the movement that she has. And you see that in Hawaii, if you've ever, and I'm sure it happens in other places, that's the only context I have, but I've been to a beach and then I go a year later and that beach doesn't exist anymore and it doesn't look anything like it did before. When I go to old rivers, when I go back to where I grew up, it's the same. There's new cut marks, there's new lines, there's new divisions in how it flows. And so it's very much a force and can be very erosive in the greatest of qualities, in the greatest of ways. So in permaculture, one of the things we pay attention to when we're in design is we address certain things in order of priority, and water is the number one priority. Observing water on land, observing how it moves, observing how it cuts, where it's dried up, where it's fully open up and flowing, where the water table is rising from below the soil, and meeting the surface of the soil, where it naturally bubbles, where it naturally creates springs, because we're going to pay attention to her as we see that water, and we're going to make intelligent choices about where to put our houses, for example. And so there's something to this being mindful of and identifying. The greatest quality that water's brought to me really has to do with my ability to soften. So in my most fiery, pissed off, angry, restricted, constricted moments of my expression of fire, as I've engaged the code model and been willing to soften and relax and open my belly and allow the breath to flow, right behind that fire is always my tears. It is always the water. And as soon as the water expresses, this like great softening happens, and then everything gets to be in flow in that way. It envelops, it swells in my tissues. Water that is restricted and not allowed to flow freely, water that's held to a dam or held in an unnatural way, will break the barrier of that, and it will flow over and completely cut its own brand new pathway. And so in that, it needs to be respected. And I know that in my own body, when in my 20s and my early 30s, when I felt sobs coming and tears, and I was in a place of work or a place of relationship where I didn't feel safe to express it, it would be a constricted experience. And then it would morph into something ugly, and eventually, through enough pressure, emerge in a very tight, restricted way. And that's not the same experience as I have now, as I embrace the movement and what water brings in my experience. So that experience of water inside of my body needs to have enough space and capacity to just freely flow. And then it takes some of that pressurized experience out of it. When I was thinking about water this morning, one of the things that came for me also was this acknowledgement that water that sits, water that doesn't flow, water that is stale, and doesn't have movement or proper penetration through the ground, becomes stinky and putrid and toxic and anaerobic in a natural environment. Whereas water that's allowed to ebb and flow through the hydrological cycles on a landscape, it cleans itself through that flow and through that motion. And so I know that inside of me is an experience where I'm keeping my water from being in flow for whatever reason, versus that opening and softening and just allowing it to just completely make my whole body putty. So as I was sort of setting the tone, the 10 minutes before this call started, I could feel all of that. I could feel it. I can feel it in my face. I had a warm, hot bath with some Epsom salts this afternoon, and it's like being wrapped in the most exquisite and sensual blanket that I could wrap myself in. And the experience of warm water on my tissues versus cold water is an entirely different sensation. And water is sacred. Water is life. If we don't have water, we don't have life. And many, many cultures have formulated incredible ceremony and cherishing moments for water in a daily way. And I think it's part of what is missing in our mainstream culture. It's become this acceptable experience for places and communities in Canada specifically to not have access to free, running, flowing, clean water. And I think when we restrict it that way, that speaks to probably something that's happening in culture, but I feel like I just rattled off about a bajillion things. But I feel this warmth and this playfulness and this sweetness, coming into this call today around water. So being very mindful that water holds energy, water holds vibration, water holds words, water holds intentions. Dr. Emoto's work talks about this. When we speak poorly to water, the water particles respond and they get all morphed and distorted and dysfunctional. When we speak sweetly and kindly and with greater intentions to a glass of water, its molecules form in the most brilliant, beautiful, whole, healthy, nourishing ways. So if I take in the language of love letters to Gaia, I want to be very mindful of the language I speak about and to and for water, whether it's in my own body or it's the bodies of water I see outside of me. Recognizing that they're conduits for flow and softening and movement and vibration. I have goosebumps. That seems really important. So I'd love to see where each of you are at since our call last week. Yeah, that's it for me now.